Petty,
No chance you can get the
here it
rail
is,
item
arrived.
moved up to PE to give Nick some time.
Welcome,
The
Petty.
rail item
You're just in time
first
to
PE,
open our
because then we
meeting
can try and get him here after lunch. See if we can deal with it later.
We may be into PE.
Go down 11. Obviously. I think that's safe. But we can do it straight after lunch.
We seem to have some credible here. Make our transformation. Have you seen that? No. Vital. Make a big mess.
Thank you, Petty.
Ngā mana kei ngai reo e ākuranga tira tēnei tamihi ki o koutou katoa, e hui anō tātou, kai rewa ki tēnei whare o tātou, nō reira tēnā koutou. To our regional councillors and also to our staff from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, to those in support behind, a greeting to us all. Ka tika kia mihi ki o tātou e nei mate, e nā e noho taumahara kai nui o tātou e pokohiwi, ka tika ka mihi. Ki maira ki a tātou te kauriora, acknowledging those who have passed on for each of us that are here today, and saying to them farewell, coming back to us in terms of our council agenda, tēnā koutou katoa. Our karakia, invocation, we'll do the left-hand side and then we'll do the right-hand side, and I'll go slow. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki te tana, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, e teo, e huka, e hauhu, te Māori ora. Cease the winds from the west,
cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land.
let the breeze blow over the ocean,
Let the red-tipped dawn come to the sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day.
sounding better each time. Thank you.
Thanks, Petty.
Give us another couple of years.
Do we have any apologies? We don't have any apologies today, so we'll move on from that. Do we have any notices? No notices. Conflict of interest for today's agenda? There are none. So we will confirmation of the minutes of the 30th of February, which is basically about Holdco for corrections. No correction. Fenton, do you move the minutes? Seconder. All those in favour? Aye. The minutes are confirmed. Follow-ups.
So, Chair, the follow-up material was provided in the agenda in relation to Napier Port, and we have actioned the P item around the Kahutia loan.
Most Union.
Well, yes, requested to them, but we also, at request from Council, have posted those documents on the website.
Okay, excellent. Are there any questions? Yeah.
On the follow-ups,
Yes.
I do recall we were looking to have a review of the consultation process for the Port of Napier, and wonder when that report's due.
So that work is underway.
Yep.
You got a report back date, Jess?
Yes, I think it's either, if it's not coming to CNS at the next meeting, it will be one following.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a mover to move the follow-ups? If there's no more?
Move.
Rick?
Just a question.
Yes, Alan.
Who is, under the Lagaima requests, who is Clayton Fippard?
Yeah, good point.
Mr. Flippard is a long-standing litigant of the Crown's, particularly in relation to social welfare payments and eligibility and the like. so well known to Work and Income or MSD locally, but this is the first time he's become engaged with us on our issues.
Figures.
Okay, we have a mover for what's that, you, Rick, was it?
I moved.
And second, who was second? Paul, second, the follow-ups?
Okay, yeah.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Call for minor items not on the agenda. We've got Tom.
Hawke's Bay Tourism Board meeting and Future Farming Initiative.
I have one visit to Waitangi Park.
Very briefly, Wakatu arterial opening.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll deal with them when we come to it. So we'll go straight to decision. Just to let everyone know, 11:45, our two ministers, Damien O'Connor and Stuart Nass, are coming to visit us. James will do a short presentation, and then we have the opportunity to hear from them and ask them questions. Okay, decision item number 6, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Belford. Are you going to move this, Tom?
Yes, I'm moving it as it's presented in item 3 and 4 in the recommendations.
Yep. Do you want to talk to it just briefly, Tom?
It's pretty.
Do we have a seconder?
Yep.
Seconder? Okay.
It's pretty straightforward. It basically simply puts the force of a resolution behind what the course of action that the chief executive has already indicated he was inclined to pursue, which was to not expend any further effort on behalf of exploring a limited plan change. The intention, and actually the way this is worded in your document, Councillor Belford notice of motion, the notice of motion is actually items 2 and 3. And that's the way it is presented in the recommendations. Item 4 was simply my narrative as to why I thought it was useful to do this. We did receive as indicated in 7.3, we had asked the staff to look into this matter. The staff did so. It conducted a due process to assess the feasibility of taking that course of action. It concluded that effectively that it would be a fool's errand to do so. And that's the conclusion that was put before the Regional Planning Committee. For procedural reasons, the committee was unable to actually take action on it. So my concern is that the public might be left somewhat in a quandary as to, well, what is the state of play here? And I think it's useful for this council to go on record indicating its determination that inquiry has been properly conducted, has reached a conclusion. There's a conclusion that a majority of this council, I believe, support, and that's what this notice of motion tests.
Thank you, Tom. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this notice of motion makes the instructions to staff explicit around our feelings about where we should be heading with the proposed plan change to Plan Change 6. But at the same time, it does not preclude the Tukituki Water Task Force negotiating or talking to the submitters to the proposal, so that things can still move forward in that respect if that's the desire. I mean, I think there'd have to be a conversion on the road at Damascus if we were going to get those submitters to even contemplate changing their minds, but that doesn't stop the Tukituki Water Task Force from having a crack at it. In the meantime, like I say, we've making an explicit instruction to staff, and I think that needs to be made.
What other speakers?
questions, Chair, or the process here?
Do you want a question?
I had a couple.
Okay.
Just to Councillor Belford, just what did he actually mean by optimum, efficient and equitable use of surface water? The word equitable.
My understanding is that the task force is trying to come up with a future strategy, I guess, for water use in that catchment that is fair to all potential folks out there who need water or want to use water. It's up to that community to decide what is equitable use. This plan change request has been tendered basically by a group that represents 48 surface water consent holders who are potentially affected by the plan change. That's the conclusion of the report commissioned by that group in terms of the number of people involved. The water that they would like to see materialize, the need varies from across those 48 users from 95 cubic meters a hectare to 4,840 cubic meters a hectare. I leave it to you to decide or to sort of surmise who you think the 4,800 cubic meter users are, and it's for the community to decide whether that's a long-term, whether that is an appropriate way for water to be allocated down there. I'm not stepping myself into that. I have my own questions or reservations about that, but that's what this task force is supposed to be looking into and resolving, and this motion does nothing to impede that process. In fact, it says staff should continue to advise these folks on various options available to them and what the facts of the water situation are and what the facts of the aquifer are and so forth. It's up for them to decide what all that means at the end of the day.
Second question?
Two for Councillor Belford, one for the Chief Executive. So the second one, just briefly, the item 2 there, or number 2, no further expenditure unless or until authorised by future action of Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Just what?
My thought there is that all plan changes eventually get reviewed. And I believe the normal life cycle of that is 10 years. And so I'm just assuming that will be an appropriate point to reconsider any aspect of Plan Change 6.
And just through you, Chair, to the Chief Executive, considering when you go down to 7.3, the recommendation of the Regional Planning Committee, which was Regional Planning Committee direct staff to scope and initiate a preliminary Tukituki plan change process, and recognise the Regional Council Committee as the body, or the Regional Planning Committee as the body. Are we by pursuing this notice of motion trampling over the RPC Act in any way, regardless of how we feel the committee operates? Is this a direct challenge to the sanctity of that committee, the Act, its intention, etc.?
Well, because the meeting did not resolve the matter, it lies on the table for the Regional Planning Committee. So at this point in time, the official status of the 19 December resolution remains live. With respect to council resourcing, a direction from the council to undertake no further expenditure is not entirely problematic in so much as there is no ongoing expenditure at the moment. This work is on hold, but to certainly unilaterally discontinue with the consideration of a plan change before the Regional Planning Committee has resolved to receive the advice that was requested on 19 December and put that to bed means that the council would be running contrary to certainly the spirit, I would suggest, of the RPC Act. The extent to which it is contrary to the letter of that is something we'd probably need to seek advice on. We'll have some further consideration on.
So we are overriding it, is this what you're saying?
Well, look, as I say, with respect to not undertaking any more work and continuing to work with the Tukituki task force, that's largely status quo. In terms of there being no further consideration of a plan change, that's implicit in terms of staff undertaking no more work on that. But the way I read the resolution is it's not in of itself overriding the intentions of the RPC at this point. And it all goes, I think, to the letter of the motion itself, which is heavily focused on staff work. So what the motion does not say is that the Regional Planning Committee shall not consider, or that the council shall not consider a further plan change. If it was, it would be more directly contrary to the Act, which is why I suggest it's probably contrary to the spirit, but the letter is probably a debatable point. Does that make sense?
Pardon me?
Very good question, though.
Tom, do you want to add anything?
I don't agree with the answer because
No, Debbie's first.
withdraw the funding, shut them down, simple as that.
Well, look, we have no further expenditure or work planned. We have done the work that was required of the committee from the 19th. That work is completed. It sits lying on the table for the committee. So we're in a holding position, effectively. Yeah.
Totally consistent with your behaviour, though, Peter.
Debbie, your question, please.
No, Fenton's asked my question.
Oh, has he?
That was, I wanted to know from James, does this council have the right to take something off the Planning Committee's agenda? And what I've got is no. Roundabout way. Yeah,
well, the Act has got some ambiguities with respect to it, but and some of that might be debatable, but I think the Act has a clear intent that the Regional Council would not take something off the Regional Planning Committee, certainly not without consultation with that committee.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
if I could ask the Chief Executive if, in fact, the matter would be re-engaged with the RPC at its next meeting, that is, the agenda item will the RPC meeting itself consider this matter, and two, could, if that committee had of a mind to reinvigorate the process, that is, to override, if you like, this notice of motion, could it do so?
So,
recommendation.
Only if it's got a quorum.
In relation to your first part of the question, it is the staff view that the issue still continues to need to be reported back as per the direction from the 19th of December. So yes, it will be on the agenda for the next committee meeting.
And the committee could decide.
But with respect to the committee's decisions, I would remind the council that the committee is a committee of council, so it could recommend to council that there be a reinvigoration. Then council would need to resolve on that.
So the nub of it is that the issue could be litigated, one, and two, a recommendation come forward. So in that sense,
that is correct.
In that sense, then the committee will continue to have an opportunity to consider the matter and make a recommendation.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? So we've had a mover and a second, and they've both spoken. Does anyone else wish to speak to this? Debbie? And then Alan.
Thank you. You know, in the Tuki catchment, we're working really hard to actually come along with a community discussion, and in the tank catchment, you guys have had about 6 years to be talking about that. Well, we've had 3 meetings, and we're trying very hard to get to a state where we're in agreement around the table. We've had a setback, and I have to say that in terms of the council going out and scoping and to initiate a preliminary plan change, I mean, the execution of that's been appalling. There has been a year's extension added onto it that wasn't ever put through the task force. So all the way through this, what I have asked is to give us the time to get back as a community together to have a discussion. So in the last week, the Mayor and I have approached Forest and Bird in the head office and invited them along to our task force. They haven't yet acknowledged receipt of our invitation or our letter, but hopefully they will. The surface water group, user groups, and the local Forest and Bird people are the two missing elements in this whole discussion. All of a sudden we've got a planning committee and experts from not even within our catchment or within Central Hawke's Bay trying to tell us how to run our district and our community. And you know, the future of the water management in Central Hawke's Bay belongs to the people of Central Hawke's Bay. It's not a political arm wrestle, and anybody who votes for this today is doing no better than dancing on the grave of something that is already very, very challenging. But what we are looking to do is go back and see if we can work together as a community first and foremost, because what we're getting now is just, it's not working at all. So I strongly oppose this today.
Thank you, Alan.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can't support this because A, it marginalises the RPC, it marginalises the Central Hawke's Bay community. If it's passed, it gives the impression that this council is anti-farming and it is overly sympathetic to extreme green groups like Forest and Bird, Fish and Game, Greenpeace, and even Kahanunu. So I'm sorry, I just can't support it.
Any other speakers? Mike?
Yes, I agree with the last two speakers. Yeah, we need the time down there. And the problem with the motion is that it sort of preempts what the Māori members of the Regional Planning Committee may decide. So the concerns that some of the councillors had about the angle that some of those people were coming from, the likes of one from Central Hawke's Bay, it adds to that angst.
Neil?
Mr. Chair, I do disagree with my colleagues, and I can easily support the resolution on the grounds that it essentially plugs a hiatus in process. So what we've had is a procedural hiccup along the way in terms of the RPC's process. The RPC can, and I understand is going to consider the matter at its next meeting, and in which case hopefully we do have a quorum and are able to proceed to consider. It doesn't preclude, for example, the RPC itself recommending that the plan change process is continued. It could do so. Turning now to the issue itself, the reality though is that in fact is most unlikely, given that the plan change process is fundamentally dead in the water already, given the strenuous efforts of submitters around it. I'm ambivalent as to whether to proceed or not. There may be merits in proceeding, but in the face of the obvious, that is an expenditure of $250,000 odd that ratepayers' money would be thrown out the window. I'd much prefer an engagement with the stakeholders and the groups in the catchment. I'd rather see that $250,000 expended in supporting changes in land use and other more important issues around this, rather than at this stage engaging in a process that is bound to fail and will cost ratepayers a lot of money.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. It's quite interesting, this, because all I'm hearing from those opposed to this is a whole bunch of political grandstanding about seeking more time, when more time is a luxury we simply don't have here. It's perfectly obvious from the reports we've had from staff that a delay in the putting together of the plan change would mean that it would only have impact for 1 year, and it might rain that year, in which case we've spent $250,000 for nothing, and no responsible council could do that. So I have no difficulty at all in supporting this notice of motion.
Any other speakers? Tom, back to you.
Yeah, so this is my right of reply.
Yeah. We'll wind up.
In terms of being anti-farmer, I am chairing a process called the Future Farming Initiative, which has gotten a wide range of people around the table to agree upon a mission, a scope of activities to progress the viability of farming in Hawke's Bay. And I'm proud that we've gotten to where we are. I'll be reporting a little bit on that later, and then there's more to come at the next Environment Committee meeting. So I'm prepared to stand behind my commitment to assisting the farming community of Hawke's Bay meet its future resilience opportunities. There are 1,000 farmers in Central Hawke's Bay who filed farm plans. They got on with it. They did what they were supposed to do. We're now in the process of testing whether those farm plans have any teeth to them. We're prepared to give the benefit of let's wait and see. Let's put those into action. But those guys have got on with it. And these 48 just don't seem to be able to get with the program. Apparently they can't read or something. I'm not quite sure what the problem is. The motion itself does not stop any further discussions, any further investigation in Central Hawke's Bay or externally as to what might be done to best address water use in Central Hawke's Bay in the future. And in fact, it's suggested here that the funds that would otherwise go down the toilet in the quest for a plan change could be better spent looking into those options if there was actually a will to do so on the part of all players in Central Hawke's Bay. So on that basis, I ask for your support for the motion.
Okay, we have a motion before us with a mover and a seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Against?
No.
Do you wish to have it recorded?
Go on then.
No?
Yes, please, division.
Well, I want you to declare was the motion lost or carried, Chair?
The motion was carried. We'll have division. All those in favour of the motion? Thank you. All those against? Motion was carried a second time. Okay. So item 7, which is public transport. A lot of documents and reading on that. Tom, are you going to talk to
So Ellen Humphreys is going to talk to this. Look, normally Anne Redgrave would be presenting this paper today, but she is away for a family wedding, and so it is. This item could have been deferred until she got back, but we just thought that if we could perhaps bring it and progress it, hopefully get it the plan adopted, then that would get us further down the track. So I'll get Ellen to speak to the paper, and happy to answer any questions.
I put together a wee PowerPoint. Emily, are you just brief escape? Oh.
This is going to be me.
It's on the desktop. Oh. Yeah, as Tom explained, Anne would normally be here to talk about this, but here I am today.
before we get started, I've been warned that abbreviations are not everybody's favourite, and unfortunately transport has a lot of them. So here are some of the ones that I'll talk to today. Obviously the RPTP, which is the plan we're discussing. The LTMA is one of the key pieces of legislation in transport. The GPS is the Government Policy Statement on Land Transport. The most current one is the 2018. This is a strategic decision-making guidance type document from central government, which is enacted through the NLTP, and the NLTF is the pot of money that those two documents discuss how to spend. So what is the RPTP? It is, oh, my slide's broken. Oh well, oh there we go. So it is mandated by the LTMA, and Part 5 discusses quite prescriptively what needs to be included, the purpose of it, and its functions and what's to be included. The purpose of it is to provide a statement of the integral public transport services, the policies and procedures, and all the information about the infrastructure and basically all things public transport in the region. It is also a tool for collaboration. It encourages regional or territorial authorities to work with transport operators to come up with the plan, and it is also a tool for public engagement, an opportunity for us to talk to the public about what we're going to do for the next 3 to 10 years. It makes the whole process quite transparent, and it includes the policies for setting and reviewing fares and how services are delivered and all those things. And for the context of this revised RPTP, it's obviously set in up to align with the GPS and the NLTP. So on this table, I've highlighted on the left side public transport. The blue bar is this year's, the 2018 to 2021 NLTP, and the orange bar or the brownie bar is the previous 3 years. And so you can see there's a 53% increase forecasted for spending on public transport, and this is also supported by transitional rail and rapid transit. Unfortunately, those other two are predominantly for Wellington and mostly Auckland spending, but the increase in public transport spending for Hawke's Bay, the NLTP forecast $13 million for our region, which is a 68% increase in previous spending, and that's a mix of money from the NLTF, which comes from NZTA, and our contribution. So how will we be spending that money? Some of the planned activities, they're all outlined in section 5.2 of the report. These are the high priority activities. All the activities are planned for the next 3 years, but they haven't been specifically forecasted at a certain time, because that will depend on the funding availability and external factors, what else is happening in the sector. So some of these key projects are to do with improving or investigating and implementing ways to improve journey time and reliability. Some potential options for this are a flex-meter to EIT direct service, streamlining services so that there's less dead running, that's empty buses that are not in service going back to the start point, and updating timetables to reflect actual run times. Another option is concession fare schemes. So the regional council already has one in place, and Some are being thought for the hospital, and I believe Anne's in talks with EIT as well. A new and improved ticketing system, so that's updating to a tag-on, tag-off system, and I believe that's all lined up to be implemented by September this year. There is also a high priority to look at the transport needs and potential solutions for Central Hawke's Bay, particularly students wanting to come to EIT, and for Wairoa. And also we're looking at trialling on-demand services. So this will be learning off Devonport and Timaru, which are trying services that instead of your regular bus route running with only 1 or 2 people, say we want to put a service to the airport, a whole bunch of people can log on to the app and say, I need to be there at 5 o'clock. Who else needs to be there at 5 o'clock? And I guess a more bespoke route will be mapped and taken to arrive at 5 p.m. And RideWise is an electronic sort of auditing management system for processing total mobility refunds and the discounts that are applied there. It's currently a very manual process. RideWise has been used in Wellington a lot, so we're looking to kind of catch up. And for some of the lower priority activities, improved secure cycle parking. We're recognising a lot of people getting on board with using electric bikes, but obviously if you've got something of that value, you want to make sure that it's safe while you're on the bus. A standalone GoBay website with specific transport information, and trialling the Choice app, which has been trialled successfully in Queenstown, and updating a revised version of the app down there. So the Choice app is part of the mobility as a service concept, where it apparently in the Queenstown one you can even line up helicopters in it. But yeah, so it's looking at all your transport options in the area and how you can use various to get from A to B. And as part of the updated ticketing system, improving real-time information about bus services and where they are. So that's a very quick run through of some key parts of the plan. Is there any questions?
So the process here is that we obviously present this to you in the hope that we can release this document for public consultation, which I think will take through a full public consultation process that runs through to May, and then the final document is brought back to the table.
Right, question to Tom.
Yeah, this was a very interesting document for me, and at some point I'd like to sit down maybe with Anne and whoever and chat about 50 comments, questions in here. My question for today, though, is simply, this is written on the premise that more use is better. And lots of different tweaks and tactics are discussed here to increase usage. But what is not here is any sense of what is there an ultimate target? I mean, is there a guesstimate or something as to what can reasonably be expected to be the usage of public transport in the region, given all the various issues involved, spatially and demographically and so forth, because at some point you would ultimately come to the question of, well, how much more expenditure do you want to make to get the extra 5,000 people or 10,000 or 50,000 to use this? And so that's the only thing that I didn't see here. I saw, okay, it's sort of presumed to be better, more people using public transportation, fine, but that comes at additional cost and investment of trying all sorts of different things, of perhaps ultimately different utility. And so what is the sort of, strategically, what is the, what's the boundary that we put around this whole thing? And I look at it purely as a marketing this is all about marketing, and so normally, you know, in most marketing situations, you try to squeeze your existing customers to buy more from you, and to buy it at a better profit margin, or usually less doable is getting new customers. This is focused on new customers to a great extent. A lot of the things that you talk about there are related to current users, increasing their satisfaction and comfortability using the system. I get that. But I guess the only thing, as I say, that I don't really have a sense of is what's the upper limit here? When do you say we've done it? When do you say we've done it?
I don't think any upper limit like that exists in the sense that you're thinking of. I think transport, as you mentioned, there are a lot of factors that are involved when someone makes a transport decision, and with public transport, as you pointed out, a lot of the activities are to make it a more attractive option, and to make it, if you're already using it, make it even easier by making it quicker or more reliable, which has an impact for how other people perceive it. But yeah, it's in the past we have seen higher rates of transport patronage in the region, but they've fallen, and it's assumed that that's due to cheaper cost of cars, and higher patronage was during the time of the global financial crisis, so people were feeling that transport was a better option at that time. So I think it's about making it a good option for people because of the benefits of public transport, the benefits of less congested roads, and obviously the greenhouse emission benefits as well.
So, Mr. Chair, follow-up. So if we were really serious about driving more people, no pun intended, to using public transportation, we would arguably be a little more focused on some things that are raised in here, like disincentivizing car use. We talk, most of this talks about making it more easier, better, attractive to use public transport. But we talk about parking, for example, the parking fees. There are various ways that one could disincentivize using cars. Are we giving adequate attention to that, do you think, in this plan?
So there was, I think it's mentioned in here, we held there was a workshop held within the Regional Transport Committee forum where all those issues were covered in terms of what is the future here, because I think the problem with setting a target out in the future is that the future keeps on changing, and it's changing rapidly, and there's talk in here of mobility as a service and you know, almost some sort of quasi-Uber system for public transport. So it seems that there's a lot potentially rapidly changing in this space, which makes it very difficult to say X number of bus movements, you know, by this date would be a particularly good target. That workshop did cover things like curbside access and what's some of the initiatives that have been taking place overseas, where absolutely they're almost charging for people to drop on and drop off, but that is effectively going to be a matter for the people who run the curbside access, which is the TAs. So I think all that thinking is encapsulated and is taking place, whether it's just appearing and is coming to the surface in this very specific focus.
Neil first, and then...
I've just got to explain something, that's all.
Okay. Only because
there have even been discussions, albeit at an informal level, with the two TAs about the parking charges, which are very, very cheap, but there hasn't been at this stage much enthusiasm to increase them. The other thing is that for a long, long time there's been free parking over on the old rail yard site. That is going to go with development there, so that will remove that impediment.
Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Can I take you to, I'm not sure either or, to your section 1.3.4, Hawke's Bay Regional Council plans. That's on page 9. And I'm reading there one of the 4 areas of focus is for sustainable services and infrastructure, and plan sets a strategic goal of carbon neutral Hawke's Bay by 2040. The problem I have is that I haven't seen the analysis of where you think the carbon neutrality is going to arise out of, the transport strategy. So what I'm asking here is there an expectation that the transport network that is supported through the plan is in itself seeking to be carbon neutral? That is, the vehicles we use, for example, are electric. Would we, for example, focus also on our own fleet to reduce carbon emissions? Are we going to offset carbon through planting trees? So how is this transport plan linked and supporting carbon neutrality? Thinking about infrastructure, should we be looking at Lime scooters, for example? So across the breadth, how does the transport strategy link to carbon neutrality, either internally or externally?
So hopefully if I've understood your question, part of your question was, do we have a public transport or a transport specific zero carbon goal for the transport sector alone? And the answer through this plan, I believe, is no. The reference there is in terms of Hawke's Bay Regional Council strategic plan and its overall ambition to to push the region towards carbon neutrality by 2040 in the integrated way that I think you described in terms of the range of activities in terms of reducing emissions and offsets.
Well, there are 2 tranches to that, aren't there? There's one, how does this transport plan support the council's carbon neutral position? I don't see that there, how it anticipates rolling out changes in the transport infrastructure to assist that, or alternatively, by having a transport system, how does that in itself reduce carbon emissions by other users, so that the consequential impacts of public transport?
Yeah, so this being a public transport plan, I think, and perhaps it's implicit and not explicit, and needs to be brought forward, is that an implicit assumption that more use of public transport, less use of private vehicles is advancing that goal.
If you're running around in, high carbon producing vehicles, you're not exactly helping the situation, are you?
Depending on how many people are on board, I suppose.
Peter, still on question, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's a question. 2 questions I have. This whole area for me is just a horror story, because despite our attempts to have public transport and get it to work, it's clear that it doesn't, at least for a place like Hawke's Bay, and I'm sure that's typical of a lot of parts of New Zealand, and there's just zero evidence that there's an uptake of this option for moving around this region. And I want to understand just how much of a horror story it is that the government and us are going to have to continue to tip loads and loads of money into. And a stat that's missing from here is the percentage of capacity that's taken up by all these journeys. So you've got a number of passenger journeys that you report on an annual basis, but that doesn't tell me whether there's on average 2 people on each bus or 6 people on each bus, and the bus can take 40 or whatever. And I actually want to know how much of a horror story this is, because I suspect it is a horror story. So that's my first question that I'm interested in. The second one is, given that that's the situation, have you considered in developing a strategy some sort of a circuit breaker that might change things? For instance, I note in the transport plan that there's a commitment to having a bus service between Hastings and Napier every 20 minutes or quarter of an hour or something. and then it's a slightly wider interval during the 9 to 3 each day. Have you considered maybe halving the fares, but also halving the number of trips? So it's every half an hour, but it's only half the cost. Have you, and maybe not going to all of the far-flung parts of Hastings or Napier, but just having a more centralised route and introducing lime scooters so people can get to more distant bus stops or something. I mean, there's got to be a circuit breaker here somewhere, and I'm asking, have you thought about it?
To your first point about the capacity, things like on-demand services are emerging exactly for that reason, where people are wanting to go to quite specific places. The example I gave was the airport, but you're not wanting to be at the airport an hour earlier than your flight. You want to be there when you want to be there, and likely there's going to be a bunch of other people in your surrounding area that are also needing to go to that same place. So on-demand services are a way to try and cater services to people's actual needs rather than people trying to fit their day around the service.
To which I'd add the, in terms of your first question, in terms of the who's not on the bus, and are we recording that, so I'm sure if Anne was sitting here, she'd probably be able to give you the number. So are you happy that I follow up with that information?
I wasn't expecting you to know it off the top of your head.
Yeah, well, your lack of faith is just in terms of the second question is that I think in the paper and it shows that they are constantly working and analysing the routes.
But they're fritting around the edges and nothing changes. That's my point.
Yeah.
And you need a circuit breaker of some sort if you're going to make this work, it seems.
Yeah, but the system, it's just a great challenge with public transport, is that the system does need to be there for those people who need it, and so we are just obviously just try to optimise that as best we can and incentivise and look at organisations, the DHB and even this organisation are setting up programs to encourage their staff to attend, and they've been quite successful, and there's more in the pipeline, and it's another area that we're trying to encourage that greater use, is for organisations to effectively step up and see this as part of their way to contribute.
Rick and then Mike.
Thank you. My question is to the Chair of the Transport Committee. Has this paper been considered by the Transport Committee? And if so, what's the recommendation?
Yes, it has been considered by the Transport Committee, and it's supported by the Transport Committee. A little bit later on, Mr. Chairman, I just want to mention a couple of things that need a little bit of correction in there, but in principle, in terms of the objectives and so on, it is supported.
We'll save the moving for you, Mike.
Yeah, just to say that just to say that my question is, do you realise that for the poor people, the old people, this is really important?
Exactly.
Paul, question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have three.
What's the answer?
Yes, yes, and we have some very hard-working people out in the transport team that are that obviously with us in the Total Mobility Service who you're very conscious of that and work very hard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was looking very carefully at the planned activities, and especially the highlighted ones, which are your priorities. We've got investigate transport needs and possible solutions for Hawke, Central Hawke's Bay and Warrell. Does that include the starting of a total mobility scheme in Warrell? Because I notice there isn't one there at the moment.
I might have to come back to you on that, if that's okay, Councillor.
That's okay. The other one is, which is probably it's kind of a follow-up from Mike's question, was around the gold card hours. Now they're set down by central government who's funding that, aren't
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Have we, has the sector been lobbying central government to extend those hours at all, or is there any thought been given to that?
So I can't answer that question. I can take that as a follow-up if that's okay.
Yep. That's fine. And then my final question is where you've got, this is under Appendix C, Strategy 3, Reduce Poor Performing Services. And I kind of think this kind of goes on from what Councillor Bevan was talking about in terms of connectivity of all the services and that. It worries me, or it worries me that when you're looking at a particular service about hub and spokes in terms of, you get people feeding into a central point then to go somewhere else. If you take away one of those spokes, then the whole service itself deteriorates over time. So I'd hope that when you're looking at reviewing what you would call poor performing services, that is also taken into consideration as part of an integrated system and not just taken a particular route or unit isn't taken in isolation.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that goes to some broader issues in terms of like where are the bus stops. Sometimes the poor performance can come down to where the bus stop is, and it may be that certain people don't want a bus stop in a certain place, so that means that the bus has to follow, a bit of a circuitous path to get there, which lowers the efficiency. So it's not just, is the route right or wrong, but I mean, can we optimise that route in other ways?
Actually, I have one further question, Chair, if you can indulge me. You talked about the bus shelters they're obviously the responsibility of the territorial authorities. Do you have much, what's the feeling about it? Do you have much pushback from the territorial authorities about putting in more bus stops or improving the ones that we have at the moment?
So we have inertia. I wouldn't call it necessarily pushback, but we do have some active conversations where we are asking for bus stops to be moved, and we end up in a bit of a process.
It was a big problem, but it's not as big a problem now.
Any other questions?
Difficult word to use.
Do you have a question?
Have a second, Mr. Chair.
You have a question?
Just a quick, brief question on the total mobility scheme. Can you just advise what the access criteria is and the level of, if you like, subsidy to those users? So, and do they get a chit, or how does that work?
I can't comment on the level of it, but my very vague understanding is that they get a chit of a chit, and then it gets
so given to a private taxi operator to pick them up and drive.
That's correct. Yeah.
Can I suggest that they provide a note for you explaining how it works? It is a bit complicated for an answer like this. You want to know, you genuinely want to know how it works.
Yeah, I do. But
it is complicated. I know people who use them. So why don't the transport people just write a brief memo explaining how the system works and circulate to all councillors? It'll all be there in the...
Well, we occasionally come across constituents who ask us about that.
Just on that, before we go to the motion, how much abuse do you think is occurring in the mobility scheme?
Abuse.
I'm sure any system is open to to being pushed to its limits, and I'm sure that perhaps will be instances of abuse. But look, knowing the staff who deal with it and knowing how long they've dealt with it, they know the people and they have systems and they do follow up, and there are instances where those follow-ups and investigations do cause them to make different decisions around whether they're issuing these things or not. So it's like any system, any system's open to abuse, but I'm confident that we've got the people and systems in place to mitigate that and minimise it.
The other thing is, I just want to add to Paul's question, because it's certainly a huge issue with our older people, and especially grey power, around the extension of the hours. And I've talked to the Chair of the Transport Committee about that, because they miss the connecting bus. Whether we've looked at ways of, you've answered the question, but I just want to add to that, whether we look at ways, because those are the people that are big users of our buses, and it's not really working as well as it might, and it's on their minds, and they'll probably be watching this today.
So to the point which I'd make is that this is a document to go out to consultation.
The other So we outsource our services, outsource the management of our buses. Do we relook at that periodically?
Yeah, so the contract. Yeah, so there's a contract in place, and that goes through a process, and it's effectively our job is to manage that contract.
Okay, right. We have a mover and a seconder.
I'll move it.
No, we have a mover and a seconder. We have Fenton. Alan's moving, and Fenton's second. Alan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, it is not an easy matter to run a public transport system. But we are fortunate that we've got very, very good staff, and the system is being improved incrementally. And whilst over the last 2 or 3 years patronage has dropped back, it's still far greater than it was at the outset. I'd just like to make the point that in terms of the text, on page 9, I believe there needs to be a little change to the last paragraph under problem 1. It talks about petrol price increases in the second half of 2018 may start to influence these decisions. Unfortunately, since then, fortunately or unfortunately, since then in 2019, the price of fuel has reduced substantially. So the issue is volatility that adds to uncertainty, and I'd just like that if the text could be just improved a little in that area. The other thing is that presently there's some policy difficulties with carrying e-bikes on buses, and I believe that should be investigated, because e-bikes are well, they complement public transport extremely well, and the popularity of them is growing by the day. But I think it's a good plan. It's forward-looking, and I'd hope the council would adopt it for consultation.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just happy to see this go out. Can I just ask, in regard to public transport requirements in Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay, it's all been tried before, but I actually think there may be an appetite now with a bit better connectivity through the likes of social media, etc., to try and find a mix and match process that does work. And can I just ask that the document be sent to the Wairoa Māori Standing Committee and the Central Hawke's Bay Māori Standing Committee for their perusal, because I think they may have some solutions. They certainly have some need, and I think we could find a way through it. In regard to the success or otherwise, you know, we're not a trucking company. We're not sort of trying to get all the decks of the trailer full each time, because part of this is about service. And, you know, that's the main reason I think we're in here. Actually, when you want to use the analogy of a trucking company, it used to be cheaper, but it still is cheaper for me to truck a cattle beast from Wairoa to Stortford Lodge sale yards and to get a kid back to Iona College, but I digress. So you've got, you know, it's fit for purpose, and I think we've got to be conscious of the fact that this is about service as it is about you know, ultra efficiency. So there will be some inefficiencies in this program, whether we like it or not. But I think the service part of it is a big part of what it's about.
Thank you, Fenton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And
I didn't say that. You're getting the back pen.
Can we have some order over here, please? Mr. Chair, my comments are not intended to in any way diminish the excellent work that the staff do in the transport field. I know that if we wanted administrative folk to do this, we couldn't ask for better than we have now. They do a tremendous job of administering the transport plan and system we have. However, you've got to ask yourself, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? essentially we're saying it's for people who need it. It's a service for those that may not be able to be transported from A to B. And fair enough, we have this obligation in a number of areas of council. But you've got to ask yourself, why are we clinging to a service, and as my colleague Peter Bevan had said, that's clearly not working. It doesn't work efficiently and effectively. I face this every day when I drive behind a massive bus going down Church Road. And you've got to look at it and say, there's only one person on there. Why are we doing that? We've already got vestiges of what may be an alternative to meet the need of those that need transport, and that's through the mobility service. What we do is we give a voucher to a private taxi company to take a person from A to B and back again. Should, in fact, given that we've got a pretty ill-defined rationale and purpose set out, for example, in carbon emissions, we don't quite know how we're doing it. We just think it may support carbon neutrality. The document doesn't tell us anything in that regard. So we don't even have purpose there. So should, in fact, we be thinking about the needs of people who want to be transported and can't, and give them a voucher. Say, let's get away from these massive hulking buses that trundle along and clutter our roadways, and find alternatives that can transport people efficiently and as fair. And at the moment we don't have equity across Wairau and Central Hawke's Bay. We don't have equity for those that are outside the planned routes that our buses travel. Are we better to examine the whole purpose that we're trying to address here, and spend those millions of dollars? And I, Mr. Chair, over 2 decades have sat here looking at the numbers and the eyes water. Several $1 million a year, tens of millions of dollars over decades. And I'm suggesting maybe it's time to review, in fact, whether Council's commitment and misty-eyed approach to public transport is constrained and continues in operating large diesel buses. So, Mr. Chair, happy to support people being transported who need transport, but I question and challenge whether our plans, and this plan in particular, is particularly probing around why are we here, why are we doing it, and should we continue to do it at least until 2040, which is the only long-term plan that this document suggests we follow. Thank you. Now, Tom.
Yes, I'm entirely sympathetic with Councillor Curtin's comments. It seems to me that there are 2 reasons to consider public transport. One is the social need. There are clearly people who do not have access to private vehicles and need to get to work, to school, to engage in the culture of the community and so forth, and some provision of some kind needs to be made to meet that social obligation. And the other is the environmental impact of alternative forms of transport and our overall interest in minimizing those environmental impacts. It seems to me there are a few numbers missing that would be useful in a public consultation document. One, I'm pretty sure there is not, we don't indicate anywhere in this document what the spend is. I don't think there's a dollar figure in this document that says today we are spending X. Should we spend 20% more, 20% less? That seems to be kind of a fundamental question to be asking. In terms of fuel, in terms of carbon neutrality, fuel savings, et cetera, if we are able to calculate passenger miles, which I'm sure we are, in terms of people who use the system, it would be relatively easy to compare that in the fuel and emissions aspects of that to, well, what if all those miles, passenger miles, were achieved in private vehicles of X mileage, capacity. we'd instantly have a number, a net number there. Are we saving gobs of fuel and emissions, or a tiny amount, or a marginal amount, or is it neutral? Are we not doing anything toward what would be one of the most fundamental goals of operating the system? So I don't see any numbers like that, but they probably are pretty readily obtained. The other is, back to my initial question, users. We have passengers, 666,000 passengers, but that could be 20,000 users of the system, because people go to school 5 times they go 5 times a day, or five times a week, 5 times a week home. That's 10 per one person. They go to work 5 times a day, or whatever, or 5 times a week, and back, or whatever. So are we providing a gigantic apparatus here that carts around 10,000 people in Hawke's Bay? Do we know? What's the number? And if it's only 10,000 people, then Neil's entirely correct. Give them all a voucher and let them call a taxi. Or other more modern schemes than that, sharing and yada, 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 which are talked about here. So it does seem to me that it's at some point, and maybe it's in the context of we next make a funding decision about this, I guess, in our long-term plan. Is that next time? I mean, the next time that cycle comes around, it seems to me we ought to be asking the question, if we really pinpointed the need that we have, the people involved, it may be that it's far more important to provide access to the core of the region from Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay than it is to provide intercity service between Napier and Hastings, for example. We don't know. I don't think we know. And until we actually know who the users are, what the numbers are, and so forth, I'm not sure we can really come up with the most efficient delivery system for it. So, as I said at the outset, this paper fascinated me. There's just lots and lots of issues in here, tactical things and what have you. But it may be time to roll forward. But I think there are bigger issues that we need to consider as a council in due course here. And maybe it's once we have the feedback to this round, we'll get a bunch of observations, comments from various people, and then hopefully start a process that heads in the direction that I think Neil is raising and that Peter has raised, that we ought to.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Taking it face value, the plan itself, I've got no problem with it. I think it's quite well set out, and it's reasonably understandable what we're thinking in terms of dealing with, especially with the buses. But I've been fascinated by the comments from Councillors Curtin, Belford and Bevan. I think they've been really insightful, and I think that it is an issue that we really need to be thinking about in the future. There's a whole bunch of disruptive technologies coming on around transport that seem to be like a snapshot of the vision in the future. What we're looking at in the future is quite different than what we've got today, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should be almost embracing it and looking at is that going to how that's going to change things, and whether there's some huge opportunities in there for us to change the way that we're doing things. We shouldn't be fixated on just continuing rolling forward what we've been doing in the past. So, in that respect, I'm quite happy to support the plan through as it is. But I think Councillor Belford's raised a good point in terms of with the long-term plan coming up, and when this plan is again due for review in another 3 years' time, there should be some thinking around. Is a bus service really necessary to fulfil the needs and requirements for those sections of the community that really use those services?
Thank you. With the ninth bit, I wish to speak to that too, because I think we're getting the clear message that, and Paul did raise the issue about disruptive technologies. Well, if there's any sector that's going to be influenced by disruptive technology, it's this one. There's no doubt about that. So it's a dramatically, and Peter raised that this is a dramatically changing environment, and I must admit I agree with Paul that those three speakers, got their head around this quite well, I thought, and we have to really look hard at what we're doing here in the future. Given where it's going, we need really innovative solutions and I would like to see that in the vision statement here, that this is a very practical paper, and this is a very practical subject, of course, so it should be a practical paper, and I think it was a good paper. But in the vision, if we could be more innovative, we want to be market leaders here. The sector is going to need innovation and new thinking, and I think we should spell that out in the vision statement. Spell it out that we understand it, and we're going to do it. I just want to mention the one thing. All those ideas that come up, they need to all be thought about. But we do have a large section of our community that is our older people that do use the buses. It is, and they do use them, and the subsidies really help them. It's a lot of them on fixed incomes, and that it's not quite long enough. And I'd like to look at ways of how we do that, how we do extend the hours for them in particular. But it also worries me, and it's been raised that, when I drive past the buses, I mostly see 1 or 2 or 3 people in big diesel buses, mostly. So very seldom do you see it full. But we also need some innovative solutions on how we get the kids from Waipakarau and Waipawa into our town, into our educational facilities, into our town, and into the hospital. So there's a whole lot of really great thinking to be done around this sector, and I'd like to see it done. And how we do that, whether we have a working group or how we put that together, and how we embrace ideas that are coming. I love some of the ideas that you were putting up today, There's no doubt about it, you're putting your brain around it, but I'd like to see a working group say, well, how do we actually take this to another level of thinking? And I think we're capable of doing that. So good paper, and you'll get good support for it, but I think you're hearing that we want some thinking outside the square. Alan, do you want us to wind up?
Oh, just very briefly, just to respond. The reason that we do it is that it is mandated by central government, and also it fits with our social obligations, and we do have social obligations to meet the needs of quite a large proportion of the population who cannot access a vehicle. That's children, students, the elderly, the disabled, and those who are ill or who don't have the ability to drive a motor vehicle anymore. And age comes to us all. Get a stroke.
Really?
Me particularly. But something goes wrong, you can't drive. No. Then you are socially disabled, no question about that. I do intend to put some information out to cover this issue of vouchering. Now, and I am absolutely confident that if we estimated the cost of vouchering nearly 700,000 trips by bus, that you'd be absolutely horrified. But we'll get that information out. I'll also get information out on the number of people who are regular users of the bus service. But I commend this plan to you as a way forward, and the backing of professional staff who are working very, very hard to make incremental improvements all the time to this system. Also, just remember that, you know, nearly 700,000 trips. That's probably 5 to 550,000 car trips that are avoided with the consequent environmental and pollution implications.
Thank you. Okay, we move the recommendation to release the draft reports. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now, we've got 10 minutes before our ministers come in.
You ought to be able to do the seal. At least get the seal.
Yeah, we've got the fixing the common seal.
I'll move the common seal be affixed.
Process. You're seconding it. Okay, we have a move and a second to fix the common seal.
I waive my right to speak.
He doesn't require to speak. All those in favour?
Aye.
Okay.
RPC report too, Mr. Chair.
Do the RPC report as well.
Why don't we just move on to item 10?
9. For the Māori Committee.
Kia ora no tātou, me atu ki te kai tuhi Hawke o tēnei reporter. I met at Matahiwi Marae, a very good meeting. For the first time, the 4 tai whenua gave written reports. This was good from the aspect of they really had to think about it rather than firing from the hip. One of the requirements I said to them would be to get the reports earlier so the appropriate manager can be at the meeting to answer, and if they're not, to be answered via email. So it's not a matter of I don't think at our particular committee that we attack the managers, but it's just good to have these written reports and give the managers a little bit of time. Also, each meeting, the members appreciate the opportunity to quiz the CEO and the chairman on their up-to-date reports. It's very current, and that's something that they really like. We had a speaker from the proposed Three Waters hui on Thursday week, and they were very interested in Heratonga's report, which included Māori o te wai, which is the spirit of the waters, and so I've been in contact with them, so they will, Heratonga that is, and they will be attending the meeting. That's about all, Mr. Chairman.
Not the spirit.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike on his report? No questions. I'll move that. When you seconder, Fenton will second. He was present. Do you want to make any comments?
Just briefly, that report on the Māori was probably the best I've seen. Actually, I think that's got legs. I think that's going to get us somewhere.
Thank you. Well, okay, we're moving second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Report is received. The Environmental and Services. Tom, do you wish to speak to it, or Environmental Services?
Standing in the river.
Salient points.
I was planning to take it as read, but...
Yeah, we can take it as read if you wish.
Yeah, read. I'm happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have the Environmental Services. Was a big meeting with a lot of issues. Are there any questions for the Chair?
I had a question for the CE.
Oh.
Pardon? Was there a question there?
Yes. Can you put?
I think the most contentious issue in the entire meeting was the dispute over the proper shading of waterways. Item 5.4, with the chairman disagreeing with Councillor Bevan strenuously as to the
he was wrong. That's
best approach.
Tough debate.
But,
You want to start the debate again?
I can show you.
But I don't think anything else here. The Clyde River dredging, we know we're into a process here that's going to cost a considerable amount of money. There may be some consenting issues that are going to be difficult to traverse in terms of what is done with dredge material. and there was a request for a little more work to be done on whether there was any augmentation options that might reduce the stress on the Clyde River in that regard. But otherwise, I don't see anything here that
Can
suggests
the chair
greater
answer
need.
your question, or does the CEO need to answer your question?
My question's for James.
Okay, well, I'm happy to move the report.
I think I should be allowed to move the report.
Well, you can move it. Well, Mike,
I would like to move the report be adopted.
Move it. Second up.
And I've said my piece.
Said your piece. Any
I'll
other
reserve the
questions?
right to reply.
And you're right, yes, Finan.
I have finally got the permission of a nominee for the Environmental Awards, and I've submitted that through the appropriate channels. So hopefully we can accept, or that will be accepted at the next Environment and Services Committee.
Yes, yeah. Excellent. And there's some other nominations too, which is good. Okay, all those in favour of accepting?
I would like to speak then, but I have something that I need to ask James before I speak, so it's quite important. The fact that that opportunity's not arising, I will speak, but I'd like to address the Central Hawke's Bay wastewater discharge and the fact that, and I was hoping James could confirm it or outline what's going on far more accurately than what our staff felt disinclined to do, but that whole discussion agenda item turned into quite a bit of political grandstanding by one or two of the councillors, and it's caused quite great offence to some of the people in the reference group. So I'd just like to point out that this update was purely voluntary, and that committee is under the terms of their Environment Court actions, and that the feedback from Central Hawke's Bay was very disappointing in the chairing and the conduct of this particular aspect of the meeting.
Thank you, Debbie. You will note your points. Okay, all those in favour of accepting the environmental? Aye. Aye. Against? It's carried. Now, we've got 4 minutes. I just want to, let's just have a rest stop now before the ministers come in, and so you've got...
Just Chair, are you adjourning the meeting, or will they be recorded and part of the general meeting?
I think they're part of the general meeting, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Okay, let's go.
Aren't they? Yes. Not your understanding. So no, okay, no, they're not. So we'll adjourn the meeting. Right. Thanks for that, Councillor Finan. And hopefully they're going to be here.
Meeting now.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Just to give everyone a rest.